go-to source for the latest advancements and insights into the world of technology. I'm your host, Pratik Patel, and today we're investigating two of my favorite topics, AI and hybrid and multi-cloud. In true Lenovo 360 fashion, we'll start off by exploring Microsoft Copilot, which is an advanced creativity and collaboration. Then we'll migrate over to the Lenovo and Microsoft solution that's delivering cutting-edge solutions that simplify data center operations, enhance scalability, and drive significant cost efficiencies with the Microsoft Azure stack. But before we begin, I wanted to announce that Ingram Micro will be hosting a Lenovo Accreditation Bootcamp. Currently, the plan is to have a series of these live sessions in the coming months. If you prefer a private session for your organization, we can also accommodate that as well. But what's really in it for you? Beyond attaining sales and technical accreditations, you'll not only help your organization move up the tier stack, but you'll personally receive rewards for attending, rewards for passing the accreditation, rewards for getting a PO afterwards, rewards for, well, you get the idea. And best of all, Ingram Micro will handle all your travel arrangements. So all you need to focus on is completing the certifications. But due to the high demand, if you're interested or want to learn more, email me right now and to secure your spot in this organ for this event and really for your organization. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I was trying to do two things at once here, and apparently not good at that. Here, I'm just going to put my email into the chat right now. So if you want to email me while this is going on, that'd be perfect. Now let's get back to the show here. Please feel free to use the chat box to put all your questions and comment in, and what we'll do is we'll address them as they come in. We got a jam-packed session today, so let's get started. First up, we have David Preby. Hi, David. Glad to have you with us.
Good morning and good afternoon to the attendees, and thank you for attending today. My name is Dave Prebe, and I am a Senior Solutions Enablement Engineer for Ingram Micro's SDNS, and I'll be speaking to you today about Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you for the intro there. David, these days my channel partners are all asking about generative AI. And I know Microsoft is at the forefront of this technology with its Copilot solution. Could you provide us, like my audience, with an overview of its capabilities and really, all the highlights that, that you would actually be presenting to any of your partners?
Sure. Generative AI is an interesting topic because at its core, what are we doing? What we're doing is we are relying on computer systems to be able to execute to be able to execute and respond to questions that we pose to that computer system. And while that sounds very simple, the complexities of it are pretty significant. Right now, basically, number one, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the tool that is used to generate the content is trained on the information and has the information to be able to relay back to us and basically be able to provide that in a human understandable fashion. But then number two, that has to be able to understand the question itself. So all of these things go into this generative AI topic and generative AI capability, where what we're really doing here is we're basically putting computer technology as an assistant to individual users, where users now have the ability to pose questions to that generative AI. And then the generative AI will take the question, understand the question, find the answer to the question, and then generate its own specific response, i.e. generate unique content back to the user in response to the question that was posed to it. And that is really the foundation of what's going on with generative AI. From Microsoft's perspective, what we're really looking at doing is we're looking at taking that general capability, but then also including an organization's corporate data into the artificial intelligence's reasoning process, which means this. It means that you as a user, when you use the generative AI tools, the Copilot for Microsoft 365, and pose a question to it, it's not just going to give you a generic response. It's going to give you a response that is grounded in your corporate data. And that's really the major value proposition that generative AI, particularly in a Microsoft sense, really brings to the table.
Perfect. Could you give us, could you share some like real world examples of how organizations can really use generative AI, Copilot to really improve their operations?
Well, sure. In fact, at this point, I actually have kind of a slide deck that if I could, I'd be willing to share with you and walk you through all kinds of details that can really get into a lot of content here about the questions that you're posing. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and let's just walk through a few things here, because one of the biggest things that we also need to address here is the simple fact. When we talk about Copilot, we have to realize that in Microsoft's world, Copilot in and of itself is actually a brand name. So when you hear the word Copilot, don't think of it as an individual product. Think of it as actually a brand name where Microsoft is taking generative AI and the promise of generative AI, and what they're doing is they're infusing it in all of their core products. So you can see a very minimal list here, and by no means exhaustive, of all the Copilots Microsoft is building. Copilot for Dynamics, which is in their business apps, Copilot for Power Platform, Copilot for Security, Copilot for GitHub, Copilot for Windows. And the one that I'm focused on here today is the Copilot for Microsoft 365. But let's not forget a recent announcement that Microsoft made, which may very well have a very relevant association with Lenovo. And that is this whole Copilot plus PCs perspective. What is Copilot plus PCs? Well, what Microsoft is doing is they're bringing artificial intelligence capabilities to the local device that a user may use. Now, what's the major benefit of this? Well, the major benefit of this is fundamentally defined down here. There are really four experiences that a personal device-based artificial intelligence at this point in time from a Microsoft perspective really has the ability to provide. The first one is called recall. And what recall is all about is basically where the artificial intelligence will essentially take snapshots of what you're doing throughout time. That way, at a future point in time, if you need to go back to what you were doing and you need to remember what you were doing, you can basically ask the Copilot service, hey, what was where was that image that I was looking at? And again, then you just name the image, and it'll go back and find it for you and find all the references that you were dealing with at that point in time, and then again, service that back out to you. Now, recall, as you can imagine, based on its description, taking snapshots of what you're doing, that can create some security holes and some big security concerns. So that one's actually been pulled back into Microsoft, and they're overhauling it to add a whole lot more security capabilities into it to ensure that recall doesn't become a tool that can be used by malicious actors to essentially, compromise an organization. So that is essentially, what's happening right now with recall. But yes, in the future, the artificial intelligence features of Windows 11 will be able to provide you this ability to go back in time and find and remember exactly what you were doing when you were doing a particular thing, and allow you to go back to that point in time to resurface all of those resources. Another feature is Co-Creator, where we now have the ability to leverage the on-device artificial intelligence chipset, the NPU, to essentially provide better graphical capabilities. Now, this again is embedded into the Windows 11 system, but it's also an API that allows organizations like Adobe, who create content creation applications, to hook into it to provide content capabilities for those applications as well. Likewise, down here, We also have live captions. And the whole point of live captions is, again, as you're in a meeting, perhaps there's a problem with the audio, or perhaps there's a problem with the hearing, or what have you. What we can do is we can turn on live captions via the Windows interface, and essentially then the live captions will leverage the artificial intelligence capabilities of the device to surface the captions of the individual that is narrating. And this, again, what's the big deal here? There is an API or applications like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Slack or what have you can use in there to hook into this so that they can do this in real time as well. And then the final Copilot Plus PC feature is essentially the Windows Studio effects. And this basically provides the ability to be very particular about how your camera displays your image. And once again, going back to the whole API architecture and discussion, Zoom, Slack, whoever you're using as your meeting provider can provide hooks or can use hooks into this API to basically consume this service that's on the local PC. So the key here with regard to Copilot is there is so much going on with Copilot, so much going on with generative AI that, again, Microsoft is really, runs the risk of confusing the populace by, again, referring to a single name, yet having all of these individual point products underneath the actual Copilot brand. So when we start talking about Microsoft 365 and Copilot for Microsoft 365, basically, why is Microsoft doing all of this? Well, one of the reasons why is because there's a latent desire for it. Back in 2022, when ChatGPT released their initial offering into market, it literally took 3 months for their artificial intelligence to achieve a 100 million user level of usage. So Microsoft saw that and said, "Yep, we're definitely seeing the surfacing of an industry need, a latent desire for users to actually leverage AI." And it really comes down to why. Microsoft really they saw this and they said, "Okay, we've got to figure out why." And really what it comes down to is, when we look at the first statistic here, 64% of people have struggled with finding time and energy to get their work done. I mean, even if I were to ask this audience, how often is it that you're not able to get through your inbox? Well, that's the type of scenario and the type of environment that we live in today's world. And over here, the 70% statistic, 70% share of people who would delegate as much as possible to AI to lessen their workloads. I would even follow up with that because this statistic was derived from a survey Microsoft did in May of 2023. They did a follow-up to that survey in 2024, and that survey found that 80% of employees in the commercial world actually were using artificial intelligence in their day-to-day jobs, meaning they were bringing their own artificial intelligence service into their organization to help them get their work done. So there definitely is a latent need out there and a latent desire to essentially for users to use artificial intelligence. So Microsoft saw this, and basically they have created their Copilot for Microsoft 365. And what's the major focus of it? It is a personal assistant. It's designed to allow individual users to get more done more effectively, more efficiently. And the image you're seeing here really just demonstrates the fact that the more users are able to leverage generative AI like Copilot for Microsoft 365, the more time they're able to save. And what does this really relate to? Well, it relates to the fact that what we're really doing is we're offloading a cumbersome, tedious work to the artificial intelligence, which is basically going to free up the employee to do what? More revenue generating, more impactful work for the organization. So the whole point here is let's get users unburied from their inbox. Let's get them through their inbox in a day and then give them time in the day to actually do more value focused activities for their organization. Now, we're going to basically move on to the next slide here. But this is basically what you might think of as a bling video. It demonstrates how it can do that. But I think instead what we'll do is we'll go to the next slide and walk through, some of the actual capabilities of what generative AI can bring to the organization. This really gets to your question, which was, hey, what are some ways that this generative AI can really do this for my organization? Well, number one, effective meetings, the ability to catch up on meetings that you missed. I mean, think of it. If your organization or your customer's organization focuses on teams, and how often is it that you get double booked? You have a meeting, two meetings that you really need to get to on Teams and you can only attend one. Well, what Copilot has the ability to do, it has the ability to essentially be an active, I shouldn't say active, I should say has the ability to provide and surface notes as well as key action items that were assigned to you inside of the second meeting that you were not able to attend. So basically what you have the ability to do is you have the ability to get a summary of what went on in that meeting that you weren't able to attend, as well as get an idea as to the action items that were assigned to you because you weren't a part of the meeting. So again, this is the way for you to essentially find that information. Secondly, data analysis. One of the great things about generative AI being an automation tool, and that's largely what we're doing with the personal assistant capabilities of Copilot for Microsoft 365, is it can grind through large sets of data and identify trends and identify cycles and give organizations easier and quicker insights into analyzing these large sets of data. Thirdly, content creation. Remember, generative AI generates new content based on the request that the user poses to the generative AI. And as a result, what it has the ability to do is to create drafts. You can create a draft of an email, a draft of a Word document, draft of a report. Now, I say a draft. Why do I say that? Well, one of the big things to remember is generative AI is not foolproof. It can generate errors and basically provide false information, or worse yet, it can provide, because again, it's looking at corporate data, maybe stuff you don't want to have surfaced to other people. So understand that, yes, generative AI and Copilot for Microsoft 365 can generate these drafts, but it's up to the human to validate the results that Copilot for Microsoft 365 presents to the user. So remember, it's always on the human because it's the human's work. Copilot is just helping the human, i.e. being a digital assistant. And then again, email processing, very much like generating drafts as well as being able to summarize long email threads. Again, it's just some of the use cases that individuals can use Copilot for Microsoft 365 for in order to, again, generate or provide a personal digital assistant for that user to, again, help them get through the grind of the day and free them up for more productive, more value-oriented activities for the organization. Now, this is a second slide that kind of looks at it in a different way. Instead of looking at it per activity, instead it looks at it from a grouping such as HR, marketing, sales, IT, finance. Very similar content here, just a different perspective. But again, these are different areas or different groups that can really leverage Copilot for Microsoft 365 and how Copilot for Microsoft 365 can really help that group inside of the organization. Now, let's not forget that, yes, going back to the first survey, there's a lot of frustration in the industry, i.e. burnout, simply because of, again, the amount of work that a lot of individuals have to absorb in their daily lives. So by giving them this tool, this personal assistant, let's also not underestimate the impact on the individual by freeing them up from basically this essentially unable to get through your inbox as an example. And again, it gives the employee a much better sense of well-being and again, of accomplishment and making sure that they're more satisfied in their jobs. So there's also a benefit to the individual themselves by giving them these types of capabilities. Now, the next question we oftentimes get is, hey, how does it do this? Well, this fundamentally runs through a quick overview of the actual technology stack. And there are really 5 pieces here. Number 1 is the large language model, and this is really a reference to the brain of the artificial intelligence. You send a request to the artificial intelligence, what's actually doing the processing? Well, it's a large language model. But then number 2, we have this, what Microsoft calls the Microsoft Graph. And this is really the piece of the puzzle that allows Copilot for Microsoft 365 to access the corporate data. This is what allows it to pull that in as part of its reasoning. So when it responds to a request, it responds with your corporate data, making it that much more relevant to what you do in your daily job. But then number 3, where's the interface for Copilot for Microsoft 365? Well, the interface is built into the business productivity applications that you use on a daily basis. Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, Teams. The user interface that a user would use to interact with Copilot is built into those applications. So when they need to do something, they don't even need to leave the application. They just launch Copilot from the application and essentially prompt a Copilot to do whatever it is they need to do from within that application. 4th piece is the internet. Now, this is an interesting one because one of the big things to keep in mind is, hey, not all answers can be derived from corporate data. Rather, some things can really only be derived from publicly available information. Take, for example, you prompt Copilot to say, hey, I'd like to have a comparison of our product, which would be internal or corporate data, and our competitor's product. Well, if you don't have information about your competitor's product, Copilot's going to have to go grab that from the internet. So what it can do is it can go scour the publicly facing internet, grab the information, and then basically build a slide for you inside of PowerPoint that does a comparison, be comparing your product and your competitor's product. So yes, internet information is definitely accessible through Copilot. So because again, not all not all questions, not all answers can be derived from the corporate data. Now, some organizations don't want to have that. They say, all right, internet, not so good, compliance risk, security risk, everything else risk. So Microsoft does give you the ability to turn that off. So that is something that can actually be turned off. And the 5th piece of Copilot really is the natural language wrapper that is wrapped around the 4 other pieces here. And this is actually more important than you might think. I mean, let's consider this. What is the standard user interaction or user interface that a user uses to interact with their desktops nowadays? Well, it's pretty much been the same since the late 80s when Windows 3.1 really took over the market. You basically point, click with the mouse, you read from the screen, and you type in with your keyboard. That's the user interface. And again, largely what we're doing here when we're typing is we're basically writing something ourselves. But now what we're doing with Copilot is we're adding a new way of interacting with the PC. What we're doing is we're basically having users tell the artificial intelligence what they want it to do using natural language. So the requests or the prompts you're submitting to the artificial intelligence, they're all going to leverage natural language. And that can be a little disconcerting for users because it's not something that they're used to doing. So getting users comfortable with this is something you've really got to consider and really take into account. Because at the end of the day, What is the one thing that is going to determine the success or failure of any technology? It's going to be user adoption. If users aren't comfortable doing it, they're not going to use it. So this whole natural language interface, yes, it opens up a myriad of flexibility, but it also creates concerns from users because it's not something they've really ever had to do before. So that takes some consideration that you really want to take into account here with Copilot for Microsoft 365. And this really gets into the map that Microsoft provides on how to really get users prepped for Copilot for Microsoft 365. And to a certain degree, this really kind of opens up maybe a view of the potential that you as partners have to maybe build services around the Copilot for Microsoft 365 offering. I mean, number one, vision and value. Obviously, you've got to sell Copilot and the vision and the value proposition of Copilot to your customers. But then number two, that opens up some key concerns because assessing and preparing a organization for Copilot. I mean, think about it. What does Copilot do? It uses the corporate data that's located in their Microsoft 365 tenant in order to base its responses off of. What does that mean? That means that the corporate data that's in the tenant is accessible to Copilot for Microsoft 365. This introduces a level of risk that organizations may not be ready for. One of the things you got to remember is this. Copilot will operate under the security context of the user using it. So say Dave, who is just an average sales guy inside of a company. Yep, he's using Copilot, and what he's doing is he's basically trying to dig up information to get numbers about maybe a competitive quote or something, so that we can generate a response to it. Well, if there's a file in the Microsoft 365 tenant of the organization that maybe was put up there by the accounting staff, and that file, that spreadsheet, has essentially payroll numbers for all the employees. And being an accounting person, being a payroll person, yeah, they don't know what permissions to assign. All they know is, hey, store stuff up here. And that's what they're doing. They're storing their stuff up there. Well, if I, as a sales rep, basically put a prompt in asking Copilot to search for financial information, well, that payroll spreadsheet sure sounds like financial information, and Copilot's going to find it if again I have permissions to it because the accounting guy didn't lock it down properly, and now I'm going to have access to that when I really shouldn't have access to it. So it's that type of governance, that type of preparation that the corporate Microsoft 365 tenant is really in dire need of having assessed. What is the security infrastructure that is, that the organization has adopted for their data in the cloud? Had they even done one? And for the United States, this is a pretty big deal. And the reason why I call out the United States is because if we look at our counterparts in Europe, they actually, from a European Union perspective, have already had to really go through all of this because of something called GDPR. US really hasn't done much of that yet, except for the state of California. But yeah, Europeans are in much better shape from a security perspective and a privacy perspective, and making sure that users don't have access to what they shouldn't have than the US. So this is something that is of key concern to our US-based customers, and it's something that needs to really be done, an assessment of the data estate of the Copilot for Microsoft 365. So that's number two. And again, that's a big opportunity for partners to help customers out with. The number three, basically purchase, deploy, and expand. Yes, but go and buy the Copilot, deploy it in a proof of concept. When you're ready to deploy it company-wide, then we move into adopt and usage, and that's where we get into all of the stuff about getting users ready. And yes, Copilot Labs, something that a website that Microsoft has made available that is there literally for user education on Copilot. Yep. Great resource to help users get ready for it. And then finally, we have the actual ability to extend Copilot. So remember what I said is that Copilot can access the data in the Microsoft 365 tenant, the corporate tenant. What if we want to extend that to other data sources, like a file server that's on-prem? Sure, we can extend it. What we have to do is we have to have a connector to do it, but we can do that. And that's, again, another area of opportunity where you as partners can offer services around that. Now, to finish off this discussion, we realize that as partners, you may not be comfortable with those types of circumstances and those discussions and those assessments. So Ingram does actually have some services that we do offer to you as partners that can help alleviate some of these concerns that you might have. We have a Kickstarter workshop where we can essentially help identify key use cases for customer environments to help them sell the value of Copilot. We also have a data governance and readiness workshop. Well, it's not even a workshop. Really, what it is, it's basically grabbing a data estate map and understanding what data has sensitive information in it, as well as what the permissions are to those files that have that sensitive information. And then finally, the Copilot architecture and deployment, where we actually not only can create a data estate map, we can actually publish policies, best practice policies to the tenant, so that can be and those policies that can then be used to secure the data inside of the tenant. So these are, again, some of the services that we at Ingram Micro offer to you as partners to, again, help you basically get ramped up and maybe get into the opportunity that Copilot for Microsoft 365 presents to you as partners. So that was really the spiel that I had that I wanted to go through. And basically what I want to do here now is pass it back and see if there, for again, any follow-up questions that you might have on any of this.
No, thank you, David. One thing that that I actually have is, I think you actually mentioned it, but I think it's good to call out. How can my channel partners really monetize this technology?
Yeah, it's really going to be around services. Fundamentally, selling product by itself is not again, it's something that you definitely want to do, but it's not going to generate the significant profit or revenue opportunity that services will. Because in the end, if the only thing you offer is product, it really then just comes a race to zero, where the only reason to go with your organization is because you're cheaper than your competition. So the opportunity to monetize Copilot really comes with regard to the services that you as an organization can wrap around the feature offering of Copilot for Microsoft 365. So that's really going to be the biggest area that I would really focus on for any partner is you as a partner. Do you have a security practice? If you do, then yeah, wrap those security services around the Copilot opportunity, because it's a perfect tandem to go to market with.
Perfect. Thank you, David. I'm actually seeing a lot of great comments, feedback from everybody saying great explanation. Yeah, this was amazing. I've actually seen a Copilot presentation, but this was really great. Thank you for that.
All right, not a problem. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you. Next up, we have Paul Becker. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
To start out, could you please kind of introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, my name is Paul Becker. I am one of the Ingram Azure pre-sales architects. My role is simply to engage with our partner network on anything Azure and help them to develop and deploy those solutions. So perfect. I'm going to talk to you today about Azure Stack HCI and Hub.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so let me just kind of set the stage a little bit here. What I've seen is now more than ever, I've seen an uptick in the request for more details about the Lenovo Think Agile MX and SXM solutions. These are the jointly validated and fully integrated solutions that extend Microsoft Azure Stack HCI and Hub solutions from hybrid and multi-cloud environments to the data center and the edge. So Paul, I think if you could help us kind of understand the difference between HCI and Hub, and then really, talk about some of the use cases, that'd be perfect.
Sure. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, so there are some slight differences with Azure Stack HCI and Hub. The key difference or the key focus of these two are they both are on-prem solutions. But one has to be connected to Azure to work properly, and the other can work independent of Azure for periods of time. So Azure Stack HCI is really just the virtualized infrastructure on-prem. You will purchase the infrastructure from one of the vendors that Microsoft suggests. There's a list they provide for that. And you will get the software that goes with it in a monthly charge. Instead of purchasing software for 1 to 3 years, you get a monthly charge for that software running on that stack. That being said, it does need to connect to Azure for a lot of its capabilities, for software updates, for security patch updates, things of that nature. So it can't be completely off network. For Azure Stack Hub, similar to Stack HCI, except for it extends the entire capabilities of Azure into the on-prem solution. So if you have virtual machines, great. You want to do containers, you want to do web APIs, you want to do OpenAI Azure solutions, they're all available through Stack Hub. It will connect to Azure, grab those resources and bring them into your hub so that they're independent of Azure if you lose connectivity. So that in Hub, you can actually be disconnected from the Azure platform and it will run independent of it. So that's the difference between those two. Now here's a little example of what that looks like on the next slide. So when you talk about the capabilities of Hub and HCI, as you see here, Hub goes into the entire suite of services that Azure has available to it. Azure Stack HCI does not. It's simply the infrastructure virtualized with Azure supporting that infrastructure. So I don't know if you all can see this. It's pretty tiny. Let's see. So which one would be right? So if you, as I mentioned, if you need something just virtualized on-prem, then you would use HCI. If you're going to use something that wants to have the entire service capability of Azure, but you still need an on-prem solution for particular reasons, which I'll go into, you would consider using the Hub solution. So when you think about these two, they both work fine on-prem. They both are physical infrastructure on-prem. So there are use cases for why that would be important. Let's see if I can get to that slide because these are, so let's see, here's the use cases for that. I'll go into it briefly. So if you think about retail stores, point of sale systems, there's tons of environments where the HCI solution would work just fine for that environment. They need virtualized servers, they need some place to store their data, and need some place with a lot of memory, and they can just put all that in a stack on-prem that will then feed that information to Azure so that they can pull analytics at the corporate office or pull other data from the corporate office, such as your financials and things of that nature. So retail stores, there's a really good use case for that. Branch offices, if you have branch offices that are small and they're really remote or they're too far away to connect to an Azure central office due to latency or other particular issues, say you don't have great internet, which in some cases it's still an issue in the US and in other countries as well, you would use either HCI or Hub for that. Ideally, both of those would work for a branch office that is more isolated, has lower throughput capacity, and just really needs to have its own on-prem environment solution. Manufacturing plants are another good example of that. You think about all the material data that they have to go through, and they have to have their analytics engines run all this information so that they know their logistics and their inventory, they understand their delivery cycles. If you're running that completely in the cloud and you lose connectivity to the cloud, now you have to wait for that to come back before you can do anything. If you had HCI or Hub on-prem, at least you'd have the opportunity to continue to work until you got connectivity to the cloud, so you could get into that larger ecosystem of capabilities. And healthcare organizations is another good one, for the same reasons I already mentioned, but also because they have, in some situations, they have compliance standards that are more rigorous than other companies do. And the compliance would say this particular type of data must stay on-prem. This data can go into the cloud, it can go into other environments, it can be connected to the internet, but this one needs to be isolated. So that'd be a good situation where you want to consider that as well. In addition to that, there's certain countries that have sovereignty rights to all data, and they won't allow that data to leave the country. In that situation, this would be a good time to use it. And I have one slide here I didn't cover, but I'll go over it real quick. So when to use when to consider the HCI solution, we have your hybrid cloud environments. If you want to use your hybrid cloud, as I suggested, with the on-prem systems, HCI or Hub, which I mentioned before, Hub can be disconnected from Azure and still run independent of it for a good period of time. The HCI solution can be offline for a period, but you won't be able to log in and out of it if you don't have connectivity to the network. So hybrid cloud environments, obviously a good scenario for that. Edge computing, where the offices are remote, is also a good one. If you wanted to use virtual desktop, one of the great things about Azure Stack HCI is it does a great job of virtualizing that infrastructure so that when you run the virtual desktop solution on it, it only utilizes the amount of compute capacity needed for that particular instance. Azure Stack HCI does have one limitation though with that. It will run the workload on-prem, but it still needs Azure for its monitoring and management of those workloads. So it can run independent of Azure temporarily, but it wouldn't be able to do any monitoring or management of those workloads, so they'd stay static at that point. And then, of course, regulatory compliance is one I spoke about earlier. There's a big issue with regulatory compliance in various countries, especially in European countries, where the data can't leave that country. It can't even come to the US to be manipulated and then brought back to country. That's considered export. You cannot do that. So it needs to stay in country. If someone needs to work with it from outside of that country, they have to connect to it in that country's on-prem system and leave it in that on-prem system. So that is a really good time to use HCI or Hub. And that is the end of my presentation. I went through it fairly quickly.
So then, Paul, I did have one question on that end.
Sure.
Thinking about my channel partners, can you recommend some best practices or have some kind of insight into what could help them achieve the most success with Azure Stack HCI or Hub?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I'm one of the pre-sales architects that supports the partner network whenever needed. We're available here to be engaged, to give you advice on when to use HCI, Hub, or anything else Azure. We're here to help you design and engineer those solutions as well, and we also have staff here that can deploy those solutions for you. So we're here to support. But additionally, whenever you think about the capabilities of HCI and Hub, they do replace that on-prem infrastructure that you have for maybe VMware or some other virtualized solution. It does replace that. So there's a benefit to having that, because now you still have the on-prem systems, you still have the virtualization, but you also have the robust capabilities of the Azure ecosystem connected to that on-prem system, managing it, monitoring it, doing analytics on it. And if you want to continue to connect those on-prem systems to Azure for the additional services and capabilities that Azure has, like container solutions like AKS, the OpenAI solutions that Azure has, or maybe Azure Fabric, which is a really great capability that allows you to combine all your data into one location and be able to use it and consume it in Power BI or other output sources. That's all good reasons to use Hub or HCI. They give you the freedom of virtualized capabilities in your infrastructure, gives you the robustness of Azure if you want to continue to deploy solutions that connect to the Azure ecosystem. And it gives you the security of having it all on-prem if that's the situation that your customer needs.
Perfect, Paul. Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Anybody have questions? Do we have time for questions?
Yep, we have a few minutes here. I've been checking the chat. I'm not seeing any questions that have come in. Well, so let's give it a few seconds here. But yeah, thank you. What I'll do is, well, let's say, let's kind of wrap it up here. We've reached the end of another informative session. I think every one of my sessions have been great, but this one I was able to pack in two different technologies that that everybody's talking about. So this was perfect. So for me, my call to action to you is really, to engage the Lenovo and Microsoft partners. The teams that you want to really reach out to is my Ingram Micro team. I'll actually put their information into the chat, but they can assist you with any kind of opportunities that you have, or even learn more about these solutions that can really help your clients. Yeah, give me 1 second. I'll put the contact info into the chat here, just so you have email for all the resources that the Ingram Micro team can offer. Plus, while we're here, let me actually put in the August Tech Talk registration link as well, just so you have that handy as well. So the way I kind of see it is, what I kind of started out with was, don't forget to email me if you're interested in attending the accreditation bootcamp. And that's really it for today. A big thank you to Paul and David for sharing their knowledge, and to all of you for tuning in. And as always, make it a terrific Tuesday. Have a great week, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.